Okay. What's up, folks? Cross SG, and yes, this is my face. For those of you who've been following me all the way since Genshin on my other channel, never shown my face on YouTube before, or at least on that channel before. Never streamed. I only started streaming in Diablo 4. And, well, yeah, this is my mug. Hi, Cross SG. Nice to meet you. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the build that I've been using so far in Season 1. I'm only level 76. I haven't had a lot of time to play this season as compared to preseason. Just work's got a little bit busy with the kids and all that. It's just not as much time as I had preseason. So I'm only level 76. But things have been going well so far in game despite the 1.1 nerfs and all that. I mean, I didn't really kind of panic too much when I saw the nerfs because I kind of figured, hey, you know what? It would make sense if they provided some context, which they did. And once they provided that context, I kind of had a feeling that season one would be okay. And as you can see from those guys that have hit level 100, the guys that have hit cleared tier 100, clearly season one is turning out to be pretty decent. Not that I agree that it's a good idea to nerf the whole game in lieu of the season mechanic, by the way. I don't agree that that's a good decision. The season mechanic should always be put above, on top of everything else. It should give you something extra. You should never nerf the game in lieu of a season mechanic. You balance the season mechanic if you don't want it to be that powerful. It's just as simple as that. So anyway, this is not a patch nerf discussion video. This is a build discussion video, and let's just jump straight into the build. So this is the build I'm using for season 1. Talk about the skill tree first. Obviously, it's a walking arsenal whirlwind build that uses a two-handed mace. Nothing too different here. You've probably, if you watch my other videos, you've seen this build before. Lunging strike, whirlwind into violent whirlwind. I'll talk about this later because this matters. Yeah, look, pretty standard. If you've watched any of my build guides, you'll see that this is exactly how I recommended building the Barbarian for the season starter Barbarian, and this is exactly how I built it. Right, walking arsenal and Paragon board. If you watch my build guide again, this is exactly how I recommended that you structure your Paragon board, and that's exactly what I did. Maybe I'll just briefly go over the Paragon tree, okay? So first one would be exploit, of course. Put all decks, go up the defensive side, but still take this node here. Go up the defensive side, but still take this node here. Maximize the 39 dexterity. And of course, exploit glyph, which I have it at level 15 already. Next board would be decimator. You go straight up. You take all the vulnerable nodes along the way. I have mortal draw in this one, and I put it for dex. Right? In my build guide, I did recommend putting, might in here, but what I realized is I kind of need mortal draw a little bit earlier because of the crit. I needed the crit strike chance, so I made mortal draw the second glyph that I put in. But otherwise, nothing else changes. I just have to put the associated points into dexterity, which in radius here we have 34. Moving up, we have the Flawless Technique board, same as my build guide states. And I have Undaunted, which is exactly the same. Going up, we take all the willpower nodes for 54 total willpower, and then it gives you a whole bunch of damage while fortified. And then we take the crit nodes here, and we move on to the Carnage board, the Blood Rage board, which I haven't quite completed yet. This board is the Strength board, so I'll be putting the Ire glyph in this one eventually. All right, so that was the Paragon board and the skill tree. So the two builds variants that I'll be showing today would be the Barber variant and the non-Barber variant, which is really just swapping this ring out. So if I swap this ring out, I don't have the Barber. I use Dance. I believe this is what this is called, the one that core skills cost life every 5 seconds, and you deal increased damage with skills that cost life. This is a really good Caged Heart. Very, very good. It it completely eliminates any resource problems that you could possibly have. It's so strong, in fact, that I could even run this in this exact setup right here without changing anything. I could just take the point out of this and put it into Unbridled Rage, and I'd actually do fine. I will run out of Fury from time to time, but otherwise I can actually use Unbridled Rage without any other changes to the build. That's how strong this heart here is. So Dark Dance, I believe that's what it's called. Very good heart. Of course, Revenge. Mine's a 19.5. I do have like 20% perfect rolled ones, but I just don't want to use it right now in this gear because this isn't the best ring. Yes, it has vulnerable damage. Yes, it has maximum life and decent crit chance, but I wish I had crit damage or close damage, something to that effect. Excuse me. When I get a better ring, I'll put a 20% in it. Anyway, so the third one is, of course, I can't remember the name of this this heart, but it's a vicious heart, and it's the one that gives crit damage. So you gain crit damage, but your non-critical strikes deal less damage. So this is the non-barber setup, and see, pretty standard. I do have both Death Blow and Rupture because I haven't found one with maximum armor, and of course lucky hit chance whilst you have a barrier is not that important. It's all stated in my my guide that I'll link in the description. Of course, all the stat priorities, nothing has changed as far as I'm concerned. My chess piece, it's still a sacred chess piece. I haven't found, in fact, I haven't found any good ancestral chess pieces whatsoever, which is very strange. I found like 3 or 4 decent pens. I haven't found a single chess piece that is usable, so I'm still using my sacred one. Of course, forgot to mention Numbing Wrath on the helm. I have Iron Warrior on the chess piece. This is just the base Iron Warrior. I have a perfect rolled one. I'm not going to put it on until I get a better chess piece. For my gloves, the only thing you really need to focus on here is the critical strike chance and the Whirlwind ranks. I haven't found one with attack speed that would be ideal, so this is the one I'm using for now. And of course I have it with the Relentless Berserker for Berserk uptime. Hence, all the damage reduction stats plus maximum life, and I have a perfect aspect of might on the pens. The boots, Berserk duration, Fortify generation, strength, movement speed, these are pretty much the perfect stats, not perfectly rolled, but the perfect stats that you want on a boots, in my opinion. I would have preferred evade charges, but if movement speed on evade is pretty good as well. Of course, I have the weapons master aspect on it, which is necessary if you're running a build like mine. You need 2 charges each, or at least 2 charges on one skill. So you definitely want weapon master. For my amulet, Disobedience, naturally. Even after the nerf, Disobedience is still very strong. And I have a pretty decent, in fact, this is a pretty god-rolled amulet, and I got it at level 60. Item power 757. This was level 60. I found this amulet before I even hit level 60. Right? And look at the stats. I've got damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding, 10% flat damage reduction, 3 to wallop, and cooldown reduction. Now, I would have preferred if the cooldown reduction was total armor, total strength, something else, because I don't really need the cooldown reduction. But hey, I'll take it. It's a perfect cooldown reduction roll. Right? And like I said, Disobedience, and of course I have the Dark Dance Heart. And the rings, I've already gone over them. This is a pretty good ring. Critical strike chance, critical strike damage, maximum life, vulnerable damage. Vulnerable damage, I can't speak. And I have a perfectly rolled Dire Whirlwind on it. Now, the reason why I actually have Dire Whirlwind, in my build guide, I actually don't use Dire Whirlwind. But the reason why I use it now is because of this Vicious Heart. I really do not want to run any risk of me not landing any crits, so a vast majority of my Whirlwind hits are going to be crits. I know a lot of you are going to put the Dire Whirlwind on a 2-handed weapon. It's not an issue, it's personal preference. I feel that it's sufficient to have it on a ring or on a 1-handed weapon or on your gloves. Perfectly sufficient. But you can obviously put it on a two-handed weapon if you want to. What else is there? Weapons. This is not a great roll on a two-handed mace, but it is 805 item power, and that's pretty much the main reason why I'm using it. And my one-handed weapons are pretty decent. We have damage to close, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, all stats, which I need. I have Dust Devils on this one. I haven't found aspect of the expectant that is worth using yet. When I do find a perfect rolled one, it'll replace Dust Devils. Same thing on my axe. I'm running a mace and an axe. It really doesn't matter what you run here, honestly. Perhaps you might always want to run a mace, one mace, or two swords, or whatever. It doesn't make much of a difference. What really matters is the stats, and it's identical on both weapons. And some of you might be wondering, why core skill damage? No reason in particular. I would rather have close damage, but that's just how my gear rolled. Anyway, two-handed axe or two-handed sword, whichever you want. It's a slashing weapon. You want to use a polearm, that works as well. As long as it's a slashing weapon or a slicing weapon, depending on where you're from, you're good to go, right? And I have critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, damage to close, and strength. So this is a really well-rolled axe. On it, I have Edge Masters. Not a perfect roll. Haven't found a perfect roll one yet. So yeah, so that's the gear. And this would be the ring I use when I want to swap the Barber in. This is the Barber variant. This is the non-Barber variant. And let's talk about the Barber for a second. So what does the Barber do? Firstly, it's a Wrathful Heart. You can only equip one Wrathful Heart across your gear. Critical strikes and all subsequent damage within 2 to 4 seconds is absorbed by your target. Then the absorbed damage erupts onto the surrounding enemies. Stored damage is increased by 14% per second. Now, how this works is really simple. Once you land a critical strike for the next 2 to 4 seconds, depending on what you roll. For me, it's 2.2 seconds. So once I land a critical strike for the next 2.2 seconds, I don't deal any damage. Any damage I deal is not visible. It is stored, and that damage is multiplied by 14% times 2.2. What is that? 30.8. So that damage is multiplied by 30.8%, and then it is dealt all at once to all the targets in the area. So effectively, this Barber gives me an increase of 30.8% multiplicative damage. That's one way you can look at it. Now, obviously, if you have a 4-second Barber, that would increase it by 56%, but it's not as simple as 4 second is better than 2 second, because there are little nuances when it comes to the Barber and how it interacts with certain skills that sometimes you might not want to have a 4-second Barber. Sometimes you might actually want to go for something closer to 2 seconds, just so that the Barber activates more often and is less disruptive to your skills. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is, as a general rule, any skill or any passive ability that says something like deals direct damage, deals damage, has the word damage in it basically, they tend to not work with the Barber. Because after you land a critical strike, you'll see no damage on the screen, which means you're not actually dealing any damage to any targets. So anything that procs based off of direct damage tends to not work. Now, I say the word tends because there are some skills that have the words direct damage that actually works with the Barber. And there are some skills, on the flip side, that don't have anything to do with damage that actually doesn't work with the Barber. So, first problem, the Barber messes with some of the skills and some of the procs. Some builds are completely shut down when they use the Barber because they just can't proc anything, right? Fortunately for my build on the Barbarian, the Barber doesn't really disable anything, at least in this build. Well, it does disable some stuff that I'll talk about in a bit, but on a whole, the builds are all still functional. Whether you go for the Barber or not is honestly entirely up to you. As a general rule, in AoE situations, the Barber is absolutely overpowered. It's almost broken how overpowered the Barber is when you have high density. On single targets, depending on the Barber you have, it just increases your damage by said amount. 56% if it's 4 seconds, less if it's less than 4 seconds. So you might be wondering, right? Hey, dude, 56% is more than, it's almost 2 to 3 times of a legendary aspect, is more than any other heart can give you. How is that not OP? Well, the reason why it's not OP is because if you have a 4-second Barber, there are a lot of things that could go wrong. You could have vulnerable up on the target, but the Barber charges for 4 seconds. By the time it explodes, you no longer have vulnerable on the target. And therefore, that explosion doesn't benefit from vulnerable damage. That happens more often than you think. Especially if you're not using a build like mine, that's going to be happening all the time. The Barber on a single target on a boss, it's just going to explode randomly, and half the time it's going to explode when vulnerable is not up on the boss. So the only way to counter this is to have 100% full control of your character's vulnerable uptime, which in my build, I actually have 100% control of my vulnerable uptime. So my Barber always procs when vulnerable is up on the boss. In that instance, Barber does outperform any other option for single target. So you get what I mean. There's a lot of setup that is required for Barber to be OP for single target. It is completely OP for high density, for AoE, but on single targets, you do have to have very specific setups in order for it to do better than a non-Barber setup on a single target boss. All right, so enough going off on tangents and stuff. I'm sorry, folks. This is the first time you're seeing my mug. This is completely unscripted. Let's just jump straight into the Nightmare runs where I showcase both the Barber variant and the non-Barber variants. And I'll also talk a little bit more about what I mean by these interactions right here. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to showcase the interaction between passives like Pressure Point and Expose Vulnerability, how they interact with the Barber gem or the Barber heart. And generally it is true that if the skill says dealing direct damage, it tends to not work with the Barber. And if a skill doesn't say anything to do with damage, it tends to work. But for these two in particular, it's completely the other way around. So how am I going to showcase this? Obviously, I'm going to go into a Nightmare dungeon, and I have three sources of vulnerable damage. The first one would be Exploit. Now, this one, everyone already knows. It doesn't work with the Barber. I mean, it does if you happen to deal damage outside of the Barber's store duration. Yes, it will proc. But you got to remember that Exploit comes with a 20-second internal cooldown, so that internal cooldown has to come up whilst you are outside of the Barber window, if you get what I mean, right? So that's why folks are saying this doesn't work with the Barber. So anyway, this is one source. I'm going to remove it. I have two more sources of vulnerable damage, and that would be a vulnerable procs, and that would be Pressure Point and Expose Vulnerability. Now, how I'm going to test this is very simple. Expose Vulnerability requires me to use a weapon mastery skill, either Rupture or Death Blow. So I'm just not going to use any of my weapon mastery skills. And I'm just going to Whirlwind non-stop. So let's see if I can get a nice showcase of this. All right, so I'm not going to use any of my weapon mastery skills. I only have one source of vulnerable procs, which would be Pressure Point. So Barber is on right now. So just observe. Look at how much vulnerable procs I get. No procs. No procs at all. Nothing. Nada. See? I can just hold the button down forever. It's not going to proc. All right, now, if I was to swap this out. Yeah. There, see? Proc right away. Right? That's another proc. as you can see, what did it proc 3 times, right? So there's a discrepancy there. Let's try that again. See? Vulnerable propped. And it procced again. Of course, I'm stunned. Come on, guys, work with me. I'm trying to do a showcase here. And it procs again. So, yeah, as you can see, no problems proccing pressure point when the Barber is not equipped. Just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to equip the Barber one more time. We're going to do this one more time. Barber, putting it on. Oh, another elite mod. Perfect. Alright, let's see what we got. No procs. No procs at all. But so you see the difference, right? This is not very scientific, but it's as obvious as I can make it that exposed vulnerability is a prime example of something that doesn't mention the words damage, doesn't mention the word direct, doesn't mention the word hit, and it doesn't work with Barber, right? Now, let me show you without this, right? With the Barber, using something that clearly states direct damage. And I'll show you that it completely works with the Barber. I can have almost a 100% vulnerable uptime just using rotating between Rupture and Death Blow and using exposed vulnerability. So I have no exploit, no pressure point, no problem. Vulnerables up all the time. Yeah, so again, right, I only have one source of vulnerable, so just observe the vulnerable procs on the mobs as I go through this run. It's almost a 100% vulnerable uptime.
You're a saint.
You know what? Where is it? Give me a little bit more run speed, please. This is so slow. Oh no, this is an elite pack instance. Okay. But yeah, anyway, I think that was more than enough. So obviously this is also showcasing how the Barber build variant works, right? So this is a good showcase. It's a tier 45. It's not the highest, but I am only level 76. As you can see, I had virtually no problems doing a tier 45 Nightmare. And it also obviously showcased what I mean by you can't really trust the description of skills. There's no There's general guidelines, like if you happen to see direct damage, it generally doesn't work with the Barber, but there are instances where it does, clearly, this does. And there are instances where it doesn't mention damage and it, in fact, doesn't work with the Barber. So just wanted to showcase this. And now I'm going to do another run and I'm going to show you the build variant that doesn't have the Barber. Never be too careful. Don't know if this has been fixed or not. Retribution. Preseason, you had to unequip it and re-equip it every time you came in from town. They didn't state that they fixed the bug. They just nerfed it. So I don't know if I still have to do it or not. So you're going to see a lot more numbers, but a lot smaller numbers. Look at this guy. Whoa, whoa, I wasn't paying attention. Oh, look at this. Is there a reason why they spawn you so far away? I don't get it. Yeah, so as you can see, pretty standard. Nothing new about this build without the Barber. Um, Behaves exactly how you would expect it to behave. Just to recap real quick, if you're running the Barber, there's really no point taking Pressure Point. Just go with Exposed Vulnerability, go with a couple of Weapon Mastery skills, and you're good to go. You're going to have vulnerable up all the time. If you're not using the Barber, obviously you can equip exploit, because why not? And you could also choose to have pressure point, or you could choose not to have pressure point and put it, say, into movement speed or something more defensive, or something else, right? Another benefit, which I forgot to talk about during the run itself, if you don't use the Barber, you're going to have Berserk up a lot more often. And that is one of the downsides of using the Barber, because of this, right? Damaging an enemy. So now this is an example of something that the word damaging actually applies as you think it should. Damaging an enemy with a core skill. This doesn't work with when the Barber is active. So the only way that you can proc this is outside of the Barber duration. And therefore, this doesn't actually contribute all that much to your Berserk uptime whilst you have the Barber equipped. Now, it does help, of course, if you have a short duration Barber like I do. It still does help, because as long as you damage an enemy, you have a chance to increase Berserking by 2 seconds, right? And I generate Berserking with both Lunging Strike as well as Death Blow. So it still helps. It just doesn't work as well as it does without the Barber. So in this build, right, in this variant right here, without the Barber, this is very useful. I have a 100% Berserk uptime. With the Barber, I don't have a 100% Berserk uptime. So pros and cons, right? Anyway, I hope you could tell the difference. Tier 47 without the Barber, Tier 45 with the Barber, both do it perfectly fine. The Barber obviously clears density a lot quicker. It also does decently boost my single target damage. But then again, without the Barber, it's just a regular Walking Arsenal Whirlwind build, so it functions as you would expect it to function, which is not great in the single target damage department anyway. So yeah, I hope this was useful, and I hope this was helpful to you guys to understand the interactions between firstly to showcase the build that I'm using right now, and secondly to talk about the interaction Barber has with this particular build. Alright folks, that's a wrap for today's video. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't, crush that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care folks.